Hello, and welcome to a six-part series of short videos entitled The Six-Point Pattern of the Anti-Aristotelians. So this is a seemingly arcane subject, I understand. And I start with a question though. Why the heck should you care about a talk entitled The Six-Point Pattern of the Anti-Aristotelians? Allow me to preempt that with a preface. Then we'll get into the outline of the presentation and the answer to that question. Also, a second question, and an alternative title, is shouldn't you really know better after all this time? Let's begin to answer those questions with some background. Over the past 2,500 years, human beings have suffered from most eras through genocide, poverty, disease, and misery, causes which include the Christian Dark Ages and Inquisition, jihad and terrorism, wars, Nazi concentration camps, communist gulags, monarchies and dictatorships, and so on. We will see in this presentation who the anti-Aristotelians are, and that they are anti-life and anti-happiness. Thus, they are responsible for these tragedies across the past 2,500 years. This is not necessary. We really should know better by now. In contrast, though, human beings have also experienced brief eras of freedom, relative prosperity and peace, scientific advances in the medical and technology fields, and thus an overall enhanced quality of life. We'll also see that the Aristotelians have brought this enhanced quality of life, and that going forward, this should be the expected norm for human life and happiness. Thus, yes, you should care about this seemingly arcane topic for your life and your happiness. The 6 points of the anti-Aristotelians pattern, which are the subject of this presentation and series of videos, are threats to your life, to your happiness, and to the people and things you value, your career, your romantic life, your family and friends, your personal interests. Each of these points is a threat to your ability to pursue your rational goals. I suggest you consider them as warning signs or red flags. But I ask again, why should you care about this topic? As philosopher and novelist Ayn Rand brilliantly identified, quote, to hold one's own life as one's own ultimate value and one's own happiness as one's highest purpose are two aspects of the same achievement, unquote. The anti-Aristotelians, as we shall see, stand in the way of you achieving your life as your ultimate value and your happiness as your highest moral purpose. Aristotle identified the importance of happiness in one's life and what the source of happiness is. Man's happiness or well-being in Aristotle's system is regarded as the supreme end of all endeavor. Every being becomes happy by the unfolding of his own nature and of his own peculiar activity. Man, therefore, through reason, unquote. And that's from Wilhelm Windelband. The anti-Aristotelians, as we shall see, are threats to your life and happiness because they are anti-reason. And to make clear the concepts we've discussed of life, happiness, and values, let's take a minute to go over them. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generating action. It is only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. It is only to a living entity that things can be good or evil. We will see the good and the evil in this series of videos. We shall see that the anti-Aristotelians fundamentally prevent your ability to sustain and generate your life. Happiness. Happiness is the state of consciousness which proceeds from the achievement of one's values. Happiness is a state of non-contradictory joy, a joy without penalty or guilt. That's from philosopher-novelist Ayn Rand. One achieves both life and happiness by setting goals and gaining as well as keeping values. Existentially, the activity of pursuing rational goals is the activity of maintaining one's life. Psychologically, its result and reward is an emotional state of happiness. To clarify, existentially refers to biological survival, values such as food, water, shelter, and clothing. Psychologically refers to the happiness you get from values, such as friends, a romantic partner, music, and art. Sometimes you get both existential and psychological value from the same thing. Your career, for example. You get money and a sense of accomplishment. Dinner with your romantic partner. You gain in a nice restaurant. You gain food, but the joy of being together. We shall see that the anti-Aristotelians fundamentally prevent you from achieving your values and thus your happiness. And again, that's why you should care about this topic. Okay, so that was our preface. Here is an outline of our agenda. We will cover over the course of these 6 short videos basic concepts critical to this talk, Aristotelian eras and accomplishments. We refer to that as the triumph of reason, anti-Aristotelian eras and their destruction, and then the antidote to the anti-Aristotelians. So let's jump into the following concepts. I'll be using these concepts throughout the presentation in these videos and want to make sure we're all together. Aristotelian, anti-Aristotelian, reason, mystics of spirit, also just known as mysticism, and mystics of muscle, also known as skepticism. And here we have the famous painting by Raphael, The School of Athens, with reason-based Aristotle looking out to the world, and the otherworldly Plato looking upward. My use of the term Aristotelian is twofold. It can be applied to Aristotle's fundamental ideas, that is, to describe his view of epistemology. Epistemology is the science of how we know. And in Aristotle's view, that is reason. Aristotelian, in this sense, does not imply agreement with all of Aristotle's ideas. The focus is upon his epistemology of reason. There is Aristotle on the picture on the right. By reason, we mean, in the words of Dr. Leonard Peikoff, the senses, concepts, logic. These are the elements of man's rational faculty, its start, its form, and its method. In essence, follow reason means base knowledge on observation, form concepts according to actual measurable relationships among concretes, use concepts according to the rules of logic. Let me give you this brief example of reason. When you were a very small baby, you began to identify objects with your senses. You didn't know what they were. At some point, your parents began to point at objects, such as apple and orange. You began to learn that objects had names, and you began to imitate. Apple and orange are first-level concepts. You can point to them. As you grew older, you came to understand that apples and oranges are similar. They are fruit. Fruit is a second-level concept. Same thing with peas, corn, and carrots. All first-level concepts that you can point to. And these comprise a second-level concept called vegetables. You learn the same thing about meats, beef and chicken, for example. And then you learned a third-level concept. Meat, fruits, and vegetables are food. So far, we have sense perception and concept formation with some volition mixed in. You had to make the decision to think about these things. That's volition. Then you started using logic. You identified the feeling known as hunger and integrated that with the need to eat those concepts. And you learned that if you were going to take a few-hour car ride, and you weren't hungry now, but likely wanted to eat later, that many foods had to be kept cool to preserve them. So you would use a cooler and some ice, and so on. This is a very simple example of using reason, involving the senses, volition, concept formation, and logic. A more historical example will follow. I also apply the term Aristotelian to those who in part or whole significantly advocate a philosophy of reason. These include Thomas Aquinas, the father of the Renaissance, John Locke, father of the Enlightenment, from the Christian world, both of those, Averroes and Avicenna, from the Islamic world, Maimonides, Gersonides, and Mendelssohn, from Jewish culture, and Ayn Rand and subsequent philosophers from objectivism. More on all of these shortly. We have pictured here Muslim philosopher Averroes and of Christian St. Thomas Aquinas. So now we get to the why and what of reason, and what I call reason as the primary conceptual delineator. What do I mean by this? The Aristotelians and objectivists judge ideas and people as to whether they follow reason. That is, whether they are rational, because reason is man's supreme value for survival. Those who are not reason-based, we identify as mystics or skeptics, depending on their particular brand of anti-reason point of view. Christians do the same thing. Either you are a believer in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, or you are not. That's why they lump communists and objectivists together simply as atheists. Muslims identify non-believers, Jews, Christians, and polytheists as anti-Muslim. Those are their delineators. But in our case, our delineator is reason, because reason is the supreme human value of gaining values, life, and happiness. And we identify mystics and skeptics who are anti-reason. The pictures here are of Aristotelian Jewish philosopher, astronomer Gersonides, and also of Terra and me in Cordoba, Spain, with the statue of Aristotelian Jewish philosopher Maimonides. My use of the term anti-Aristotelian is twofold as well. It can be applied to any set of ideas which are anti-reason, such as mysticism or skepticism. Skepticism holds that knowledge is impossible. In the words of Dr. Leonard Peikoff from his book, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, we just can't know. That's the view of the skeptics. Or that it is possible, that knowledge is possible without effort. That's mysticism. That you just know, for example, by a revelation from God. Have you ever run into these examples, religious examples, people referring to God's plan? He spoke to me, he tells me. And from leftists, we hear frequently that people are stupid. And how can you be sure of anything? As Ayn Rand noted, these are, quote, two sides of the same fraudulent coin. The attempt to escape the responsibility of rational cognition and the absolutism of reality, unquote. On the right here, we have anti-Aristotelians, Christian St. Augustine, German Immanuel Kant, and German Karl Marx. I also apply the term anti-Aristotelian to those who in part or whole significantly advocate a philosophy of unreason. From the Christian world, Jesus and Augustine. From the Islamic culture, Muhammad and Al-Ghazali. And from the German Kantian philosophy, Kant, Hitler, and Marx. We'll hear more about each of these shortly as well. Picture here are the Muslim leader Muhammad, German Adolf Hitler, and Jesus Christ. We can also refer to the anti-Aristotelians as mystics of spirit, mystics, and mystics of muscle, skeptics. From John Galt's speech in Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged, quote, both demand the surrender of your mind, one to their revelations, the other to their reflexes. Man's good, say both, is to give up his personal desires, to deny himself, renounce himself, surrender. Man's good is to negate the life he lives. Sacrifice, cry both, is the essence of morality, the highest virtue within man's reach. And this ends our first video on basic concepts. In our second video, we will review Aristotle's eras and their accomplishments.